friend invited me to something at the cathedral, and it was about trafficking of young women. And it was with another couple of charities, I think, besides your charity.
Mm.
And then we were planning to go for a trek in Nepal, and I was by that time on your email list, and we found out about a couple of films that you showed at the Union. One was to do with the position of women in Nepal, and one was to do with children who'd been educated in Kathmandu and not seen their parents for years. It sort of followed them on their journey home and the reunion with their parents. It was really moving.
Yeah.
And then we did our trek and came back, and had a lot of Nepali rupees left over, which it's closed currency. I came and gave to Lorraine, and then came to the meeting that you had in the office last June about this time.
Yes.
To find out more.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear that you've you sort of entered the charity in many different ways over the. I was at all of those events actually. I wasn't in my director's role at the time for the Sold in the cathedral, but I was working one day a week for the charity at that point, and Sarah Galvin was the ex-director.
Mm-hmm.
She was talking on the panel with Child Reach, with the other organisation.
Yeah, that's right. That rings a bell.
They were the other organisation there, and then I remember the films vividly at the university.
Mm.
One of them was particularly powerful. The second one, I think, where the children were trekking home to see their parents and they hadn't seen them in so long.
Yeah,
it was extremely emotional. And the moment that the children realised how much pain their parents went through to put them through education, and how difficult a decision it was for the parents to let their children go and accept that they weren't going to see them for years, but it benefits them in the long term. Yeah, it's really, really emotional. Good. No, nice that you came to the event last summer and met a few of my colleagues from Kathmandu.
Yes, that was really good.
Yeah. No, we really value those visits actually, because quite often what you'll find is in the international development sector, you'll find a lot of UK staff going to other countries to visit and for meetings, and not having colleagues visit the UK. So we try and have it as a two-way thing. So I will go, and then colleagues will come as well, and get a chance to visit the Faisal Wide office, and then visit schools, GP surgeries, some schools. We even went to a chicken hatchery a couple of years ago. So the agricultural technician could see some large-scale poultry production in comparison to the extremely sort of micro poultry rearing they do in the places that we work.
So Sue, thank you so much for introducing the charity to Cottam, and thanks Tom for coming to share more about the work of the charity with us. And Sue and I agreed that at least the talk, if not the questions as well, we would upload the video of your talk onto our YouTube channel if you're happy with that.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
So hopefully you'll reach a wider audience.
Perfect. Shall I share my screen and start?
Yeah. No.
Perfect. Can you both see my screen?
Yeah.
Perfect. That's great. So yeah, thanks for the introduction, Sue. So Phase Worldwide, it's a UK registered charity. It's based in Bristol. We're a fairly small organisation with 3 members of staff, and we were established in 2005. We were established in 2005 at the same time as our partner organisation, who are called Phase Nepal. And the charity was founded and started by 3 individuals. One was a businessman who went trekking in Nepal, and really fell in love with the country, and also found the conditions that people were living in very difficult, and the hardship that they faced. And the second was a GP based in the UK, and she had previously been volunteering out in Nepal, providing health expertise, and she was working with a different charity when she met the third person involved with starting the organisation, who was a Nepali. He was an international development professional, a social worker, and an engineer. They decided together that they wanted to start something by themselves. So Phase Worldwide was started which was the UK charity, along with Phase Nepal, the Nepali NGO. So since then, we've worked in partnership to empower remote communities. So we work predominantly now in the far west of the country, which is the most extreme, remote, rural areas, where access is difficult, access to healthcare, access to education, any form of formal employment is difficult. So we work there where the greatest need is. We also work in Gorkha, where the earthquakes caused quite a large amount of destruction in 2015. And then also in Sindhupalchak, which is closer to Kathmandu. So fairly central to Kathmandu, and then in the far west of the country. We work in these areas because, like I said, life's tough. There's a lack of healthcare, a lack of education, and lack of livelihoods. And that really traps communities in the cycle of poverty. So all of our work is designed in a way to empower people, to make people feel more stronger and confident, and to give people the practical means to escape the conditions they live in and improve their lives. We work in an integrated approach, so we start with health. So we work with the local government to find out areas where primary healthcare isn't being provided, where health centres aren't functioning. So we compare them to GP centres here in the UK. So there should be a government health worker providing primary healthcare, but for under-resourcing, lack of staff, vacancy within the role, the health centre isn't functioning, isn't providing that primary healthcare that it should be doing to communities. So we place nurses, A&Ms in the health posts, and we also supply it with medicine and equipment. And these, our nurses work alongside the government health workers to support them, to train them, to really build their capacity. And that's for half of the week, and then the other half of the week they do outreach work, so visiting, doing household visits to people who may not be able to access the health post if that's where they can't leave the home for a disability, or they can't if they have childcare needs or they have agricultural needs and they can't get away. Then the nurses, A&Ms, go and visit them. They also support immunisation programmes. They tackle malnutrition, identifying children who are SAM or MAM malnourished, and really making sure that people have access to healthcare that they're entitled to, and working with local chairs of mothers groups, female community health volunteers, traditional healers, to really increase the knowledge and the ability for the local community to hold the local government to account, that they have the right to healthcare, and that they should lobby and try and hold them to account if they don't. So it's a lot of capacity building, both at community level and local government, local structure level. A big part of our health programme as well is GP mentoring. So it's something that we like to think we're quite unique with, that we provide a mentoring programme for UK GPs. So we deliberately don't use the word volunteering, because we don't want people to volunteer and provide health services when there are perfectly placed Nepali colleagues who can do the same thing. So it's all about mentoring. So our GPs will go out for 2 to 3 weeks. They'll spend time in a health post with an A&M, and they will observe and they will mentor and they will comment, but they won't practice. And what that is doing, it's about improving the confidence of the A&M. It's also personal development for the UK-based GP, and a lot of it is about improving the function of the health post, how it's managed, how the logistics are managed, and trying to pass on their skill that they've developed here within the NHS to those health posts. And we send about 50 GPs across the year. Less this year, but at our highest peak in the last few years, we've sent about 50, which has been great. And we've also found that GPs come back feeling very fortunate for the health service that they operate in. So it's a really good personal development opportunity for both the UK GP and the A&M and Nepali A&M. We also work in education, so we are providing girls' empowerment programs, which is targeting girls to improve confidence and tackle taboos that they may face within the communities they're living in. We also do a lot of teacher training as well, so improving the quality of education that's delivered. And sometimes we do infrastructure support as well, so improving the environment that people are learning in, the children are learning in. And also quite importantly is adult literacy classes. So we work with women to improve their reading and writing skills. So a lot of the population that we work with can't read or write other than signing their name. So this is something that we work towards and link it directly to livelihoods. So a lot of our livelihoods work is about agriculture. We provide the materials, we provide the equipment and the seeds to support farmers in growing food to feed their families and also to sell. So particularly in the far west, about 90% of livelihoods is from agriculture, and almost 90, I think I was looking at the stats today, about 96% of food consumed is grown locally. So what people grow is really all they have to eat. So we're trying to improve the quality and quantity of the yields that they're producing, diversifying the diet, tackle malnutrition, improve health, and also generate some additional cash that people can use. So you can see here that we've got a polytunnel, and this is a farmer from our DFID funded project, and she received not just the equipment but also training. So we've got agricultural staff who will do home visits, provide support, provide guidance, and she would have also taken part in some group workshops and joined a farmers group. So it's really about providing both the means to improve farming but also the knowledge that they can put into practice. I've talked about FAYES Nepal. They're a really great organisation, and they work with other partners in the USA, in Singapore, and Austria also, and they're covering nearly 65,000 people across Nepal. So we've got a team of about 160 in total, 40 based in central office, and then the other members of staff based in the project areas. And the key thing about that is that the project staff are based in the project areas for 10 months of the year. And the 2 months that they're not there, they come back for training and also for the public holidays. But we're really about community-based interventions, which means having staff in the project areas at all times to develop trust and really maximise the impact of our work. So we strongly believe in that. We're not an organisation that goes to a really rural area, delivers some interventions, and then leaves again without any follow-up. It's really about long-term community participation. I want to talk a bit about our approaches to how we change lives in Nepal. Sort of 4 key areas of our work that I want to go over. The first one is locally driven interventions. So we conduct needs assessment and baseline surveys in where we're going to work to really understand what the need is within that community. And that helps design our programs. So the example is we're conducting a superflower food fortification session, which is about fortifying food using local grains. It's used to improve child nutrition. And after one of the sessions, a participant came up and the nurses delivered a session and said, I understand why it's important. I know how to make superflower, but I don't have the grains, I don't have the resources to do so. Because we knew that, she was then signposted to the agricultural work, and she got involved in the agricultural project. It means that she could grow the crops, then apply her knowledge into practice. So it's really designed on what the need is in that community. Working through existing frameworks. So I've mentioned that we work with local government. It's critical so that knowledge and learning is embedded in the community once our work finishes. And we also work with female community health volunteers to leverage access and scope for health interventions, and also traditional healers. So in rural areas in Nepal, traditional healing is still a very common practice. So instead of working against traditional healers, we're working with them. So after a traditional healer has given their care, they will now signpost that person to the FAYES health post so they can receive primary health care from the A&Ms. So it's about working within frameworks, working within local government. So once our project finishes, that knowledge is embedded, and it will be there for future. Contextually relevant project design. So this is about, we have our 3 areas of interventions: health, education, livelihoods, and then we have our set approach to livelihoods, which is agriculture. However, we also understand that not everyone can engage in agricultural activities. It might be because they have a disability, it might be because they're vulnerable and they're landless. So we acknowledge that, and we'll work with them with poultry, which requires very little input, and also very, very little land to grow chickens. But also now mushroom cultivation, which is very low intensity, very low input, but with quite high yields. So we've been working with some vulnerable farmers in the far west to grow mushrooms, which they've consumed, and also been selling at local market. So it's really about designing it in a way that will have impact. And we've now gone, in some of the programs we're designing at the moment, we're going one step further and doing other sorts of livelihoods, other sorts of income generation work, so baking, tailoring and sewing, hairdressing and barbers, and mobile phone repair for some people who really can't access any of the agricultural livelihoods. And finally, our approach is multi-sectorial, so it's integrated, which is proven to have most impact. So we really need to tackle health, education and livelihoods to lift people out of poverty. We don't think it's effective to just work in one area, because you could teach someone how to grow food, but if they're sick and they can't farm, then it's all ineffective. So it's really about making sure that you improve health, education and livelihoods all at the same time. I wanted to talk a little bit about our impact and what we've achieved in the last year. So we're really proud that we've worked with 53,210 patients in the last year who accessed phase health posts. 34% of these were children, and then 4% were emergency cases. So we're really proud to work with those sorts of numbers. I wanted to give you just an impression of some of the changes that we've also achieved. And this is from a previous project which was funded by DFID. Across the project, we saw there was a 29% increase in vegetable consumption within the household. Now that's due to improved knowledge, but also increased access to veg from the agricultural work. We saw a 33% increase in women who were exclusively breastfeeding in the first 6 months. We saw a 28% increase in food fortification. One that we're really proud of was a 40% increase in births attended by a skilled birth attendant or a skilled health personnel. So it's very common still for women to give birth on their own in the field behind their house. So this was a big behavioural change that happened across 3 years. We saw an increase in safe deliveries. And then a 76% increase in knowledge, attitude and practice of the first 1,000 days. So this was an indicator of how much change there had been around the first 1,000 days. So proper nutrition from conception to the age of 2, which means that children and mothers will have a best start to life. So you can see some real tangible changes from the work that we're supporting. It's impossible not to talk about COVID on a presentation like this, and I just wanted to talk about what we're doing in Nepal to prevent the spread of COVID and also work with people who are impacted. So in the last few weeks, cases of coronavirus are increasing in Nepal. About 7,000 infections today, which has increased by a few thousand in the last week. That's because of more testing, but also what we're seeing is more economic migrants returning from India and then moving across the border into Nepal, which is the free movement across that border. Quarantine centres are becoming full. Some of them don't have the greatest conditions, and we're seeing and hearing that some people are coming back without being tested, potentially carrying the virus, which is how it's moving into Nepal. So what we're doing is there's a lockdown until the end of the month, and unfortunately we've seen that it meant that people aren't accessing health services. So we're continuing to run maternal and child health services, and we've provided phase staff with appropriate PPE, as you can see in the photo. We're doing a lot of awareness and prevention work. So there's a lot of work still to be done on that. I was looking at we conducted a rapid assessment last week in one of the areas we work in, and it showed that 39% of people don't know what coronavirus is, which is for us is staggering that someone would not know what it is. So we're doing a lot of awareness and prevention work around that to make sure that people are adequately informed of how to protect themselves, and also what sort of behaviours they should adopt. So during previous outbreaks, disease outbreaks, it's known that if a person became sick in the family, the whole family would get up and they would move and they would leave their home together, which obviously is not the right thing to do with coronavirus. People need to stay indoors and stay away from other people. And we're also supporting the government, so we set up help desks outside our health posts to continue primary healthcare. We're supporting the government in managing smaller quarantine centres where we operate, as well as supporting the government with testing. And also we're working with some of the most vulnerable. So we've recently secured funding to work with 800 families who are based in Kathmandu. And these families have one person within the household who has a disability, so we're deeming them as most vulnerable. And they're vulnerable because of the economic effects of coronavirus, as well as the health implications. So these families often work in jobs which are cash in hand, daily labouring jobs, which has been completely stopped. So we're seeing a loss of income, which means inability to buy food, inability to buy essential medicines, and also even the inability to buy gas to cook with. So that was we're really pleased that we could support them there. And I know Sue said that she had been to Nepal, but for the benefit of others who may not have been to Nepal on this call, or who watched the recording, I'd just like to sort of take you there through imagery and a video, which I like to call the immersive session, to really take you from Bristol all the way to Kathmandu and then all the way to the far west of the country, to where we work. So we've taken a flight via the Middle East or via India to land in Kathmandu International Airport. From here, we have to go from Kathmandu to where the arrow is ending up in the far west of the country, to Gangadi, which is a flight from Kathmandu to Nepal Ganj on the Indian border, and then a mountain flight from Nepal Ganj up to Gangadi. Unless the Nepal Ganj flight is cancelled due to high winds, which it was when I went a few years ago. So we proceeded to hire a jeep in Nepal Ganj, and I asked my colleague Bikash how long he thought it would take us to get there. And he said around 8 or 9 hours, so we'll be driving the best course of the day to get there. So I said, okay, fine, let's get going. And I put in Google Maps how long it would take, and it couldn't tell me how long it would take, which is where I first really started to get concerned of how long it was going to take us. So we proceeded to travel along roads like this. It was petrifying when we were going around the corner and the driver's mobile phone would go, and he would pick up the phone and start talking, one hand on the wheel. It was incredibly terrifying. But we drove like this for 12 hours, and it got dark, and there were some roadworks along the way, some delays. And after 12 hours, we stopped and we stayed in a it was some sort of guest house, converted barn that we stayed in. And then we continued to travel the next day for another 10 hours. So across the course of 2 days, we've been driving for about 22 to 24 hours across 2 days, and we finally arrived in Gangadi much longer than we thought it was going to take. And we stopped at a hotel, and then the following morning we started to walk to one of the villages that we work in, where one of our projects is. You can just see it here in the distance. And we finally arrived. It was about 3 or 4 hours of walking from Gangadi. My colleagues said they could do it in 2, but I was slowing them down. I'm not used to the walking. And we arrived in I think it was Barma, the village. And we were met by lots of female farmers who were involved in our in our work, and we met by the village council leader who introduced this to the community.
तपाईको काउली गोबी साग पात आलु आलु प्याज हैन तपाईको यो सबै
I can't speak Nepali, but I do know that he was talking about potatoes and cauliflower and in cabbage. I think he was talking about what vegetables are now available in the village since Faze has been working there. And then we met Zhao, which was one of the highlights of my trip, and I remember it very vividly. And she said, before I was involved in the project, my husband didn't respect me, he didn't listen to me, but now that I'm growing my own vegetables and I'm generating an income and feeding our family, I now have a voice, which really links back to the empowerment part of our work. So Zhao, she had the materials from our agricultural support, but she also attended training, and she learned, she developed her knowledge, and she now has a very successful small farm holding where she's growing crops, she's feeding her family, and also selling surplus vegetables to generate an income, and by that she's stronger and more confident. And this is knowledge and skills that will be there for life now, and she'll pass it down to her children who are healthy and going to school. So it was a really successful trip, and something that I'm very proud of. So that's a bit of an overview about our work, and I'm happy to take any questions, or if you have any comments, and so thank you for listening, everyone.
Thanks, Tom.
Yes, thank you, Tom.
That ride in the Jeep was rather reminiscent of some Jeep rides we had.
Yeah, it was pretty terrifying. I've travelled in rural parts of the world before, but I've never travelled at height. That was the thing for me, sort of looking down and seeing a drop of 2,000 meters, and you know that if you go over that cliff, then that's it, and your sort of life's and all down to this one chap who was driving the Jeep. But I was very pleased to find out that he was actually an ex-bus driver. He was an ex-bus driver who did that route on a bus, not a Jeep. So I thought if he can do it in a bus, then he can do it in a 4x4. And we actually saw a Jeep get stuck. We saw a Jeep get stuck when we were leaving Gangadi coming back. Thankfully, the flight was on the way back, so we just had a short trip to the airport. But there was a Jeep, the bus stuck in the mud, and everyone was out pushing it. And you just thought, if it slips and goes back, it's just it's terrifying.
Hello, Anne.
Hello.
Hi, Anne.
It's very interesting, and I love the empowerment bit.
Yeah. I was going to describe it, Tom, as a really immersive presentation. I was thinking particularly about the Jeep ride, but generally you really immersed us in the development issues and projects that you're supporting and running. I've got lots of questions. I guess my first is, I guess it's too soon for you to tell if there's going to be any impact on DFID support as a result of the structural changes that department's going through.
Yeah. So we've got DFID funding until the end of March 21, and we've been told that funding will be honoured, which is great. But it's an issue. There are lots of organisations that I know of who have gone through both rounds of the application. They've gone through due diligence and been approved, and they were waiting to sign their accountable grant agreement for a 3-year project, and that has all been paused by the proposed merger. In terms of Faze Worldwide, we're waiting on an outcome of one funding round, so we don't know whether we have been shortlisted, but that's we've been told that is going to be announced next month. But in terms of the impact it's going to have, it is deeply concerning. Faze was one organisation out of about 200 that you may have seen in the Independence Day that signed a letter to the Prime Minister. Yeah. The greatest concern for me personally, and for phase as well, and for the sector, is just the impact it will have on the most vulnerable. DFID works to operate in the poorest, most vulnerable communities in the world, in the poorest countries and fragile states. And it really does work with the most vulnerable, and it also has a lot of expertise as a department. It's world class and renowned for delivering really effective development work with partners, and that's all at risk with the merger with the Foreign Office. There's potentially going to be overseas development assistance spent in middle income countries, potentially tied to foreign policy, which isn't the way that you tackle extreme poverty. It should be completely separate, in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
So can we should really be writing to our MPs to.
Yeah, I would encourage you. I've written to Tang and Debona, and I'm happy to share the template as well if you'd like to write to your MP.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, that'd be great. It's really helpful.
I can do that. Any sort of lobbying work. It's worth it, and it may do something. It may also form future manifestos as well for other parties who said that they would keep DFID if they got in. So yeah, it's a shame. It's a really shame. It's a shame for the sector, and I think for me, on a personal level, I'm not surprised by the end result. I'm not surprised that it's happened, but I am surprised at the process and how quickly it happened.
Yeah.
So I was aware of, we as a sector, we're aware that this has been in the pipeline for a couple of years, but it happened so fast. There was no consultation with the sector at all, or not known to anyone within the sector. It wasn't based on any review. It was against the recommendations of the International Development Liaison Committee, who said that it would be that aid is most effective spent through DFID as it currently is. So it came a real shock to us all, actually.
How much of your funding is through DFID?
Last year, about 20% of last year's accounts would be from DFID funding. So it's it's not ideal timing for the sector while charities are facing pressure from COVID financially, but also at a time where the work that charities do overseas is needed the most. Working with some of the most vulnerable communities, it has not come at a good time.
Yeah.
So, could you tell us a little bit more? I mean, clearly a lot of your projects are centered around supporting women. Has that is the impact of that? I mean, clearly it's positive, but does it meet with any opposition? Are there any sort of traditional, cultural, or religious barriers to women's development?
Yeah, so one of the main reasons that we work mostly with women is because when we select people to be involved with our projects, particularly the livelihoods, because we have a set amount of money that we have to spend on materials and training and staffing costs, we have to select the most vulnerable. And we follow a framework which recognises intersectional vulnerability. So we would often find that if you are a woman and disabled, you are more vulnerable than if you're a woman. So we work with cross-cutting vulnerabilities. And also in the community that we work with, there's a lot of males working overseas as economic migrants. So one of the vulnerability categories is single-headed household. We'll often find a female with her children, and the male is either in Kathmandu or in the Middle East or India working. So that's really why we work with women. In terms of conflict, we work very closely with traditional healers. We work with chairs of mothers groups who tend to be older. And we work with female community health volunteers who tend to be mid-aged, on the mid-aged to more older. So by working with them, that allows us to tackle any sort of conservative views or views which may be harmful, and we do it in a way that it's a very careful approach to tackle that, rather than an example would be if you brought a group of young mums together and started to tell them about how nutritional practices, for example, or exclusive breastfeeding, and then they went home and told their mother-in-law that they were now doing this, that might cause a conflict. So it's really important that any work we do doesn't cause any conflict or harm. So we really try and involve the whole community in our work to reduce conflict and reduce any potential harm.
Yeah. And Sue, any more questions?
No, I think I missed the first bit because it was I was reminded by, I think it was your Sue, was it you that put on WhatsApp or something?
Yes.
Yeah, because we were actually eating and I came back, and so I missed the very first bit. Yeah.
I was thinking that the COVID has stopped some mothers coming in to receive healthcare when they're pregnant, and given that you had such a wonderful record of delivering babies safely, that's a huge shame, isn't it?
Yeah, it's something that we've seen nationally. It's been reported that there's been an increase in deaths during birth, and women not accessing ANC appointments, which is really critical that pregnant women go to for ANC checkups, and then also PNC as well. And we've seen in areas that we're not operating, or other NGOs aren't operating. There's a risk that women can't receive those essential services, and we've also heard that some government staff aren't working because they're fearful of contracting coronavirus. So it's essential that these health services continue even during.
So do the government healthcare staff get PPE or not?
They do. Yeah, they do get PPE. They do get PPE.
So it's a matter of sort of education.
Or that they're entitled like PPE, but there is disruption in the transport and the timing of them getting it. So that's an issue that we face. You sort of saw by the journey from Kathmandu to the far west, and the area that I showed was the nearest area to where we flew back from. So you can even walk for 2 to 3 more days. And go even more remote. So getting PPE quickly there is difficult, and often that's where the health centres will just be closed and they wouldn't be functioning.
No. And then you said that there was a very large percentage on your quick random sample that hadn't even heard of it.
Yeah, 39% of people that we asked, do you know what coronavirus is or COVID-19, and they said that they didn't know what it was.
Yeah. Which part of Nepal was that?
It was Mugu. It was Mugu.
Right. Is that quite remote?
That's where we went on the MSc. Yeah. So that's Mugu. And then we also work next to it in Humla and Bajra as well, which are more remote. So we suspect that the data would be even worse in those more remote areas, more remote districts.
Yeah.
But no, it's a really interesting assessment actually, and we're planning to release some of that next week, which just shows the impact of coronavirus from a economic perspective and livelihoods perspective, and how it's changing behaviours. We're seeing that I think something like 95% of people said that prices have increased in the local markets, when the income shows that everyone's lost income. So it's sort of a double-edged hit.
All the people coming back, the economic migrants, are the partners of the women coming back with COVID, some of them, because their work has evaporated because there's nothing happening in other countries. So in India and the Middle East and so on.
That's correct, yeah. We're finding, again, those workers, it's cash in hand, daily labor jobs. So once that work stops, there's no money to pay rent, and they have to return home.
Yeah.
Quite long journeys. And I'm not sure if you caught that part of the call, but I was just explaining that some of the quarantine centres down on the border, the conditions are quite poor, and they're filling up quite quickly. So
they're not even getting tested. You were saying, I think.
Yes, and some individuals are obviously hearing that it's bad, and they're deciding, well, I'm not going to put myself forward for a test.
Yeah.
In case I'm going to be quarantined for 14 days, I want to get home and see my family, which is fair enough, but very dangerous.
Yes.
Mm.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
To what extent are the issues that you're dealing with a result of the 2015 earthquake, and to what extent are the issues more deeply or more historically embedded?
Yeah, so in Gorkha, that was where the earthquakes did the most damage. So in the far west of the country, there wasn't much damage done to infrastructure there. So most of the impact was central and mid Nepal. So in 2015, 16, 17, we were involved in a lot of reconstruction work. In Phase Nepal, still are to this day doing a lot of reconstruction work in Gorkha. So that we've got one more year left on a big loss refund project, which was rebuilding communities. So the first few years of that was rebuilding schools, community centres, health centres. And now we're moving into the more long-term embedding changes within the health system and livelihoods in that area. The issues related to the health system, it's been affected by conflict in the past, and the remote geography of the health centres makes it difficult for them to be managed properly and resourced, and also staffed. You'll find that some will train to be a nurse, and if they're training in a major city, or they're from a major city, it is not desirable at all to be based in a very remote part of Nepal. The conditions are very, very basic, and it's something that mainly younger nurses do for a couple of years, get some experience, and they'll be transferred. So vacancies are a big issue. I think I read last week about 60% of posts are filled. There's a 40% vacancy across the country in health positions, which shows you the gap. And recently there's been the federalisation of Nepal, so the responsibility is more local, on local governments, local councils to manage the health structure, from stocking, logistics, making sure posts are filled, making sure there's enough medicine, doing timely orders for equipment. So it's because that happens so fast. That's another reason why the health system is so weak, and that we've just it's underfunded. I think about 5% of the government's expenditure goes on healthcare. So it's I think per capita it's about £38 spent on healthcare, whereas in the UK it's about 2,800. So it's just severely underfunded, difficult conditions, changing political structures, all adds to a weak healthcare system in Nepal. That's why a lot of the work that we do is about building that local capacity, working with the government, training, giving the local health staff confidence, and upskilling them to allow us to move on. We've moved out of 2 health posts, soon to be 3, since we started. So it takes a long time. I think that's one of the things that sometimes can be quite difficult to convince trusts and foundations to support, because they want quick changes, quick results, but you can't really strengthen a health system that the local health system isn't functioning in a couple of years. It needs long-term investment and support. Once the change is achieved, it's normally achieved and there for the future.
Isn't part of the idea to sort of work yourself out of a job, as it were, in these health posts, and eventually that you hope they're going to the government health posts are going to run along the same lines in integrating into the community and that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, you've got to be, as a charity and as an NGO, you've got to be adding value to society. And the dream is that we no longer need an international development sector, just like we don't need a charity sector in the UK. So that's the dream. But it will take a long time, I think, and it will need a lot of change globally for that to happen.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely going to write to Thangan, and we'll
Yes, so am I.
we'll look forward to receiving a model letter to send,
Yes,
and we'll really encourage other members of the congregations to do that. Well, not just on behalf of your charity, but on behalf of the whole sector that's currently working with DFID.
Or do you think one should write to Thangan? I've written twice in the last 2 weeks.
Well, I emailed her last week, yet to receive a reply. But there's a few more. We have a couple of GP mentors who are based in Bristol, and they're going to write to their. I assume it's Thangan. So she might potentially have sort of 5 or 6 letters from people referencing Faisal Guide. So I might get a response and can then engage with the conversation with her and see what she can do as our local MP and what Labour can do. We'll see on that. Perfect.
Yes.
So Tom, thank you so much on behalf of all of us, and so we will put this up with the questions and discussion as well. I'm sure Anne and Sue are happy to appear as well, and hopefully then we'll continue to connect with your work and get other people engaging with it as well. But it's great to be in touch. And well, Sue, maybe you can just say finally about how the Charity of the Month operates. It means it's not just one-off, doesn't it, in terms of engagement, but an annual.
Well, it's
dependent.
I think. Pardon?
No, carry on.
I was explaining to Tom at the beginning how our Charity of the Month operates. So I was explaining that we have sort of a mixture of local and international charities that we donate 10% of our income to for that particular month. Yeah, and maybe sometime in the future when we're actually having services again, it would be nice to maybe get more people to come to a talk, because maybe
I'm more than happy when that happens and when we can do it safely. I'd be more than happy to come in and talk to the wider group. I'm based in central Bristol, so I'd be happy to come in.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Yes.
So Tom, thank you, and thanks Sue for setting this up.
Oh, it's a pleasure.